Hi, I'm Liz Murphy with PECO, and we are thrilled to be sponsoring Go Forth and Learn. It's part of the Wawa Welcome America Festival. At PECO, we know that learning never stops, so we put our energy into learning and exploring with you all week long in the comfort and safety of your home. Please enjoy, and thank you.
A simple bell with a very powerful message became a symbol for freedom throughout the world. 1732, they began building the Pennsylvania State House. The building we now refer to as Independence Hall. It would be the seat of Pennsylvania government. Isaac Norris was assigned to basically order the bell. In ordering the bell for this very prestigious building, the Pennsylvania State House, of course, he wanted the bell made by some of the best bell makers in the world. At that time, it was Whitechapel Foundry in London, England. When Isaac Norris would order the bell, he wanted to have a good weight and a good tone. Placed the order to Whitechapel Foundry, ordered the bell. Whitechapel Foundry, in fact, did include the bell. When Isaac Norris ordered the bell, he was also very specific. There were several things he wanted on the bell. He wanted the inscription, which was actually taken from the Bible, Book of Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10, which simply stated, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof." He also wanted to mention why the bell was made. So the bell was made by Whitechapel Foundry. It arrives here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As you can imagine, there's much anticipation, much excitement about their newly arrived bell. The bell was brought out, it rang, and indeed it did crack. The question now becomes what to do with the bell. Do you send it all the way back to Whitechapel Foundry in London, England, to have them recast the bell? Well, that would be all well and fine, but they would have to pay to have it sent all the way back to London, England. And there was no guarantee that the second bell was going to be in any better condition than the first. So rather than send it back to London, England, they decided to have two gentlemen here in Philadelphia, John Pass and John Stowe, recast the bell. John Pass and John Stowe melted the bell down, recast it, rolled the bell out. Once again, much anticipation. Rang the bell, didn't quite crack, but there were some problems with it. It had a very dull thud, sounded horrible. People around the city of Philadelphia blamed everything that went wrong in the city of Philadelphia over that horrible sounding bell. Rained for several days, someone famous died, all the bad luck in Philadelphia they blamed on that horrible sounding bell. John Pass and John Stowe had no choice but to melt the bell down a third time and recast the bell. The bell rang inside was basically its original purpose, and for ordering the bell, was for it to hang in the Pennsylvania State House to call the Pennsylvania Assembly to their meetings. It would also ring to signal time. It would also ring to call the public to the State House yard, and that's how where people would get their news. It was just an ordinary bell among many bells throughout the city of Philadelphia. But it held up in the tower of the Pennsylvania State House. Pennsylvania State House was constructed to be the seat of Pennsylvania government. It housed the governor of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania State House, and the Pennsylvania Assembly. The Pennsylvania State House became very monumental as a meeting place. Starting May of 1775, representatives from 13 colonies like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and many others would gather in the Pennsylvania State House in the Assembly Room to contemplate if they were going to try to work things out with England or eventually try for independence. It became more and more apparent working with England was not going to be an option. They devoted to become independent. Out of a committee, Thomas Jefferson was given the task to gather their thoughts and put them down on paper. That document be later titled the Declaration of Independence. Within that document, there's over 32 issues and concerns they have with the British Crown. The Declaration of Independence is adopted on July 4th, 1776. All the signatures are on that document by August 2nd of 1776. As time goes on, the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence occurred on July 8th, 1776. Many people gathered in the State House yard as the State House bell rang to gather to signal that monumental time in history. But as the American Revolution waged on, 7 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it would not come easily. Eventually, the American Revolution does come to an end. They defeat the British in 1783. They are, in fact, free and independent states. How is their new nation to be governed? What type of government should they have? What type of leader should they have? They had to figure that all out. Starting May of 1787, they began the Constitutional Convention. Once again, representatives from 13 colonies gather in that building to put together the United States Constitution. Within that document, they lay out the framework as to how that government should be set out. A strong central government, a system of checks and balances. So the Constitution sealed the government for the brand new nation. Away from the British Crown, on their own. How would that document play out? there are many people that were a little concerned for the Constitution because it did not mention one single word about any of the rights, privileges, and freedoms they had just fought for during the American Revolution. How would those rights be protected if they were not in the Constitution? So therefore, as that time goes on, many of the debates, the arguments, and the discussions would continue. The Constitution and the creation of a new nation brought much happiness and success and pleasure to many of those throughout the nation. But there was a large portion of the population that felt as though they were left out of that document in that new nation. Because in reading the Declaration of Independence, we the people, and basically at that time, looking at the Constitution, where it doesn't basically specify rights and freedoms. So under the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, they must not forget that slavery is still legal. So abolitionists began to fight their cause and ramp up their rallies and their gatherings to draw attention to what is not included in that new nation, in that founding document. Abolitionists around the 1830s began to look toward the Pennsylvania State House and focus in on the bell in the tower. Not only were they looking toward the bell, they were focusing very prominently on the inscription on the bell. It simply stated, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof." What better rallying cry, what better slogan to help them in their cause to eliminate slavery? Shortly after that, someone wrote a poem about the bell. And in the poem, they referred to it as the Liberty Bell. So in the 1830s, that is when it kind of transformed from being referred to as the Pennsylvania State House bell to basically the Liberty Bell. It still hangs in the tower, it still rings on the hour. But slavery would not end easily. It would take an all-out war. The Civil War raged on for years, dividing this nation between the North and the South, asking, is it a question of states' rights or to eliminate slavery? The Civil War goes on for quite some time. The bell is moved to the Assembly Room of Independence Hall. Eventually, the war is over. Slavery is abolished. But what is to happen now? This nation, those wounds run deep. They're very tender. This country does not heal itself just because the war ends. What could possibly be done to bring this great nation back together and truly become the United States of America? The bell is called upon to basically answer that call. The bell travels from city to city, town to town, state to state. So people from all over the nation, state to state, got a chance to see the Liberty Bell up close. They got to touch it. People came out by the thousands as the bell becomes a healing tool, a healing symbol for the nation. But as time goes on, it becomes more and more apparent that everyone is still not included. What about the women? Where are their rights? What is their equality? Where is their role in this new government? So they looked to the Liberty Bell as well. But they began to build their own bell, a justice bell, patterned very much after the Liberty Bell, to fight their cause for their women's movements, to get equality and the right to vote. And finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, was passed. This marks the 100th anniversary of their cause and their fight for their equality at that time. So throughout this nation, the bell has basically played a pivotal role in independence, the creation of a new nation, the abolishment of slavery, and women's rights. So it now becomes a national symbol for freedom, independence. But other countries kept a closer watch on this new nation. And they too long for many of those rights and freedoms that we have here in this great nation. So they too began to look at the Liberty Bell as their symbol, as their icon for freedom and independence throughout the world. The bell as you see it before today is in fact the world famous Liberty Bell, made in 1753. Weighs over 280 pounds. Doesn't ring anymore, but it draws people from all over the world. And as people eventually make their way to the Liberty Bell chamber to get their personal view of the bell, they are very curious. And most people tend to focus on the crack of the bell. And that's understandable. But as many people look at the bell and they focus on the crack, very few of them ever notice it's an illusion. It is indeed an illusion. Because when people are looking at the bell and asking about the crack, they're referring to this large separation here at the front of the bell. Ladies and gentlemen, let's set the story straight. That is not the crack. That is in fact a repair. People often ask, when did the bell crack? Well, that's kind of hard to tell. Because keep in mind, most of the times we don't see the bell, we just simply hear it because it's up in a tower. We don't go about our day looking with our heads up in the clouds looking for bells. You could have a cracked bell for months. But when the bell cracks, chances are what you will see is a hairline fracture, looking very much like that. When you have a cracked bell, one of the telling signs is that the sound of the bell will change. It would sound differently. So at that point, someone has to go up in the tower and look at the bell and closely inspect it. And what they will find is a hairline fracture. So now what they have to do is they have to inspect that bell and make a decision. Continue to ring the bell. The bell's going to crack, but the bell's going to vibrate, which means these two sides are going to begin to rub. That's then going to cause friction. That friction is going to cause the crack to go further. Basically, at some point, you're going to have a bell in two parts. Or you take it out of service before that occurs. What you see before you, which most people think is the crack, is actually the repair. It's a process called stop drilling. What you physically do is you drill the crack out to separate the two sides. So when you look at the bell, you will notice that there are a series of ridges. And that is basically through the drill. Because on its own, there's nothing that could happen to this bell that would make it crack that long and that thick and that wide. So what happens as you look at the bell and you ask about the crack and you finally realize that is the crack and that is the repair, you realize that this international symbol for peace, freedom, and liberty throughout the world still remains. It's not perfect. Our country isn't perfect. So still, Liberty Bell remains a symbol for freedom, independence, and liberty throughout the world.